case in point, the future of the DCEU is just kind of, I think, for lack of a better term, it's just weird right now. Like,
Yes.
just weird. It feels like they're kind of making it up as they go along, but at the same time, I kind of understand what they're going for here. So Walter Hamada is the big head honcho over at Warner Brothers, not just for DC stuff, just all Warner Brothers stuff. And he was recently interviewed about the future of DC, and he had some very interesting statements in regards to the future of DC films, saying that we will see two Batman on screen at the exact same time, but not exist in the same universe, and that um, Ben Affleck will be stepping down as Batman, and he will be replaced by Michael Keaton. Now, none of this is particularly earth-shattering news. We knew that the Battinson movies coming with our bats, which looks outstanding. That trailer looked phenomenal. And we had known for a while that it's not going to exist in the main canon, like the main timeline. It's more or less an Earth 2 story. And we'll get into more of why in a little bit. Even less surprising was the Ben Affleck being replaced by Michael Keaton thing. Because that has been rumored for a while now. Walter Hamada didn't clarify if this means after the Flash, where Ben Affleck is supposed to be included to more or less write his version of Batman out, or if he's done with the Flash. I highly doubt he's not going to be in the Flash movie, so he can get some form of closure. And I have a theory as to how that would play in a little bit. We'll circle back to that because I think there's a really cool way to do this. But bringing in Michael Keaton, we knew he was going to be in the Flash, but that he will be the new Batman going forward makes for a real interesting dichotomy in the DC universe, because like Batman was already kind of old in Batman vs Superman. He was the Dark Knight Returns version where he's like in his mid to late 50s. Keaton's like in his 70s. So we've heard reports that they want Michael Keaton's Batman to more or less kind of be like the Nick Fury of the DCEU, which I don't know if I buy that either. It's kind of odd. There's a lot of thoughts that I have on this, but before we get into all my rumors and speculation, I might even break out the tinfoil hat here. Michael, here we got two separate Batmans, Robert Pattinson and Michael Keaton's Batman. Thoughts, reactions?
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. That against any trepidation that people might be confused by this, Walter's response was not if we make good movies. Was that's not taken out of context, right?
Okay, what Michael's referring to? I'm glad you brought this up. I forgot to mention this. Walter Hamada said, if we make good movies, audiences will not be confused by this. In regards to somebody asking, well, do you think general audiences would be confused having two Batmen on screen at the same time, just not in the same universe? And he more or less said, if we make good movies, no one's going to notice or care. To that extent, I agree with him. And also, this is nothing new. The concept of having multiple characters on screen at the same time. Like, the Flash movie's been in development for however long, and the Grant Gustin show is still going on. Now, I know Justice League Mortal never ended up happening, but that was supposed to be a Justice League movie that was completely detached from the Bryan Singer Superman Returns, detached from the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, but yet still have Superman and Batman. I think we're at a point where comic book audiences are smart enough, and the general audiences are smart enough to go, oh, it's two separate Batmans? Okay, they're not connected. Like, I don't see this being overly complicated here.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that because the average movie going fan who makes up the biggest audience and cash grab, people like going to see movies. And people like the character Batman. You can see that from the theatrical acclaim and box office returns for Batman. Even regardless of whether or not you think the quality is there, people like Batman. That's just been proven. And so with this particular character, I can agree, and I will be right there seeing both films as a fan myself. The thing that you mentioned just to open this, Nate, is that this is just kind of weird at the moment, and it is. And I don't think many superheroes could pull this off, especially some of the lesser known Marvel like Marvel superheroes that have been introduced more so here in the MCU because people are unfamiliar. So you have a very familiar property and a character that is beloved. So this is a risk, but it also differentiates them from the MCU. It actually gives them their own identity. It's a big risk in my opinion to do this, but I'm still on board. And if you the way you I think it comes down to marketing. I don't know, correct me maybe if I'm wrong there, Nate, but it depends on how you're trying to sell this film is how it's going to play with people and their excitement because you're right. The Robert Pattinson Batman trailer was a significantly different tone than anything we've seen, at least in the last decade. I mean, it was vastly different than Nolan's Batman films. And I mean, from the aesthetics to the costuming to the line delivery, the actual action, completely different. I mean, people would see that and say, "Wow, that's different." And I think if you can compare that trailer to what we think we're going to get, or at least we have suspicions with Michael Keaton's return, they are going to be different. So I think people, even in that aspect, will be able to tell. I mean, I think audiences today are a little bit smarter than what we give them credit for, but Hamada is right. Hamada, excuse me. They have to be good films, otherwise people aren't going to care.
I think the other important thing here is they're not even remotely close age-wise to confuse people. One
Sure.
is a 70-year-old man and one is a early 30s man. Like, I don't think it's going to be nearly as confusing to people as we think. We have heard strong reports that they want Keaton to be like the linchpin that holds everything together going forward. Maybe even being a mentor role in a Batgirl movie, which, of course, because it's me, I always have to do the 6 degrees of separation, but in this case, the 6 degrees of Nightwing, because technically, we could still have Nightwing show up in the Michael Keaton Batman universe because Robin only showed up when it was Batman Forever and Batman and Robin with Val Kilmer and George Clooney. Michael Keaton never got a Robin, technically. And people will be like, well, Forever and Batman and Robin are in the same timeline. They are, but I could see DC easily retconning that, and maybe Keaton has had the Bat family. I don't know if they'd full on give him a Damian Wayne. But to me, this still leaves the door, actually not just leaves the door, but like breaks the door down Jericho style to the future of the DC universe very well could be Batman Beyond. Like, I know a lot of people have wanted Michael Keaton to be old Bruce Wayne for a Batman Beyond movie. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility now. I think that's definitely an option. Now, something interesting to note that I talked about earlier is this will be Ben Affleck's last run as Batman. Theoretically, I think there's a really cool way to send him off. So we know the Flash movie is more or less going to adopt the Flashpoint storyline, which Flash goes back in time to save his mom from dying at the hands of Reverse Flash, but in doing so makes the timeline worse than it was before, a la Back to the Future 2. So there's a sequel comic to Flashpoint, which I love. There's a sequel comic called Batman Flash The Button, which is more or less kind of like a crossover with it's started at the beginning of Rebirth, which is what we're under right now. And there's a slight crossover with Watchmen because we find out Dr. Manhattan's behind everything, yada, yada, yada. But Batman and Flash go back to the timeline that has the Flashpoint Batman, the one with the guns and all murdering everything. Sounds a little bit like Ben Affleck's Batman, but whatever. And so there's this great touching moment where Bruce finally gets to meet his dad, and they hug one last time. But due to the events of the story, they're undoing Flashpoint. Therefore, the universe that Thomas Wayne exists in no longer will exist anymore. That timeline will be wiped away forever. And so, in the comic, we've got this great moment where Thomas Wayne, let me see if I got this right, where Thomas Wayne is more or less going to be out of the timeline forever. And so he says, what do Waynes do? we rise. And so he just runs into this nothingness of void, never to be seen again because his timeline doesn't exist anymore. I would not be surprised in the slightest if that's what they do with Ben Affleck's Batman, of the Snyder stuff still happened, but that timeline will be swept away due to the events of Flashpoint, and that will be how we explain how we get out of Batman. But also, it would be a really, really awesome way for Ben Affleck to go out. Just go, I go out on my terms and rush into that good night type of situation. That could just be me reading way too much into it, but I think we're going all out with Flashpoint here. I wouldn't be surprised if we pull from other Flashpoint adjacent stories. You think I'm a little crazy? You think you can see that happening, Michael?
Well, I've learned not to disagree with you, especially when you're right. So there's that. But in this case, the idea, I will tell you, as somebody who really enjoyed Batman Beyond, the idea of Michael Keaton playing this sage type of person would easily be able to, uh, you know, bring somebody else under their wing and then, transition into Batman Beyond, or like this idea of, you know, this this new mantle piece taken up by like this Nightwing character that you keep mentioning that I'm familiar with. Like that sounds appealing to me because anything Michael Keaton is in, I think he's been turning to gold. He's had a really great career, but at least in the last 5-6 years, he has really had this kind of rejuvenation period, and it's been really cool to see. Now, I do have to ask you this question. So at the moment, we have a Robert Pattinson Batman. We have Michael Keaton and this rumored thing. Well, where does Ben Affleck exactly fit in for his last film? Is it with The Flash?
Oh, sorry, I had my audio off there. So I think the reason we have Ben Affleck's Batman here is because that's the Batman that Ezra Miller's Flash knows. So it would make sense that he's in this, at least in the beginning, to maybe send Barry off on his adventure a la Obi-Wan Kenobi and be like, you're the Batman I know. And then as soon as he enters the Speed Force and enters a different dimension, be like, oh, you're Batman, but not a Batman I know. Like Into the Spider-Verse, basically, of you've got your Chris Pine, your like ideal Batman, in that case Spider-Man, but then you meet another version that's similar-ish. So I think that's why Ben Affleck's in this. But also it would make a lot of sense to introduce him into this, and then if we're not using him anymore, find a good way to exit it. Like, I think Ben Affleck's Batman has been awesome, minus some glaring character issues that I have, like the whole gun thing. But I think he's owed a good exit if he does want to pursue other projects. It still bothers the crap out of me, though, that we have two Batman franchises that want to happen at the same time, yet we don't have an active Superman franchise. Like,
Yeah,
come
we're
on.
gonna
Which
just
I'll
keep
talk about that
pushing
next
the
week.
knife in deeper.
I'll,
Yeah, that's
I'll talk about that next week for our 2021 predictions, but I don't think Superman's going to be a bench player for much longer.
oh, that's a nice tease.
Yeah. And also, I opened our segment talking about it, but I'll close it talking about it. People keep asking, well, why doesn't Robert Pattinson just become the Batman of this timeline? Why doesn't Robert Pattinson just be the Batman in Justice League and everything else? Because that's not why Matt Reeves signed up to do the Batman movies. He wanted complete creative control in these movies, and I get that. So it makes a lot of sense of just they want to bring in some other Batman to be the one that's in all the franchise movies. They want Matt Reeves to do these Batman movies how he wants to do them, like Christopher Nolan was allowed to do them. And to me, that's fine, so long as Dick Grayson's introduced at some point. So sooner rather than later. But judging by that first trailer, I'm really excited for the Batman movie. So just let Matt Reeves do his own thing for that. I don't have to worry about it crossing over with anything else. So that's why Robert Pattinson isn't crossing over with Justice League or whatever else. Total creative freedom on the part of Matt Reeves.